And we're back, my people. You caught me mid-drink of my stimulant, featuring Diet Coke. Feel free to enjoy. All right, my people, let's talk about storing and retrieving memories. And we got to start with storage. So we talked about what memories are. We talked about encoding. And now let's talk about storage, which is like a really, really important part, right? So again, we need to know, we're going to learn about how we store information and where we store it, right? So let's get going with module 32. So in this little fancy contraption, right, in our Akin-Shifrin model, we are now going to talk about storage. And at the heart of memory is storage. This is essentially, why try to encode if there's nowhere to store it, right? So we have just a little reminder, we have our sensory memory. We already talked about encoding, and it's in our working and short-term memory, encoding, long-term memory, and we're going to talk about retrieval after. So again, we have to talk about retaining information in our storage systems, right? So when we store it. And so we are going to be mainly talking about the long-term memory, since that is where we store our information. Okay, so how well have you encoded and stored information? So here's just a fun couple questions, and you can follow along and answer them with me if you'd like. Penny, which way does Lincoln face on the penny? Oh my gosh, try to say that twice. It's the left. Boop. And then we have the American flag. How many red stripes versus white stripes does an American flag have? You didn't know? Neither did I, my people. 7 red, 6 white. Next one, we have a pencil. How many sides does a wooden pencil have? You would think 2, 1, 3. Shocker! Dun, 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 dun. It is 6. And just to keep on going, since we're having such a fun time, feel free to go pass through this if you're like, Miss H, I got to do my notes and I got no time for funny business. Statue of Liberty, in which hand does she hold the torch? It is her right. And for money, who is on the $20 bill? It is Jackson. And who is on the back of the $20 bill? And it is the White House. So again, my people, you're like, oh my gosh, I know nothing. That's what I felt too. But how do we encode and store information, right? How do we know what's important? So we're going to talk about sensory memory. And within sensory memory, again, the duration of sensory memory with how long we have before we kind of get rid of it. For eyesight, for things that we see, it's about half a second long. For anything we hear, it's about 3 to 4 seconds long. And if it's having to do with touch, it is less than 1 second long. Okay, so again, our sensory memory is always dealing with a bunch of stuff. And we have to be able to choose what we want to hold on to, right? And so when we talk about working memory, here are a few things to know. So working memory, again, the new name for short-term memory, has a limited capacity, right? So working memory, you can be studying something and talking to your friend about it, but it doesn't mean that it's long-term because you're right now currently working on it, right? So, a little blurb, but Sir George Hamilton observed that he could accurately remember up to 7 beans thrown on the floor. If there were more beans, he guessed. So again, they came up with this either 5 to 9 numbers of random things we can hold in our working memory, okay? And again, our working memory is not long-term. It's not meant to hold things for a long period of time, right? So again, remember, not supposed to hold things. So let's talk about capacity, right? So the capacity and George Miller came up with this. He's the one who studied it. And he's the one who kind of came up with our capacity of our working memory. And it's really between 5 to 9 letters, right? So if you want to play along with this, you're more than welcome to. I usually do this in class. It's going to quickly flash a row of numbers, and you're going to have to quickly memorize it as much as you can, right? And then you're going to have to tell me what you can recite. 3, 2, 1. Okay, so if you remember, you probably started to chunk, so mut, gick, right? That's all I got, and that's 6. And so usually people will fall between 5 letters to 9 letters that they can remember in a short period of time, and that's your working memory, right? Because you're actively trying to process. But again, if I asked you guys this at the end of the class period, you probably wouldn't remember very little because you didn't know that you had to effortlessly remember it for later, right? So again, working memory duration, time, so percentage of who recalled the consonants, right, went down after time went on because our brain knew that we weren't, we didn't expect to have to retrieve it again. So the longer something is in your working memory without studying of encoding, it's going to go away, right? So again, after time has gone on, less and less people were able to remember the nonsense syllables, right? So talking about long-term, so long-term memory is essentially our unlimited capacity of storage. Again, like I said, there's no, button in our brain saying, oh, you're full, that's it, right? And so for example, in nature, the Clark nutcracker can locate 6,000 caches of buried pine seeds during the winter and spring. So they can locate 6,000 different places where they buried food. Like, who can do that, right? Like, that would be pretty cool. That's a pretty, I would put that in my bio if I was impressed, and I can be like, oh, I remember 6,000 places of where I buried food, right? Right. And this is just some fun stats from your old textbook that I always use, but feel free to look at it. You don't have to write it down, just some world records of people being able to remember. And it blows my mind. Like, the shortest time to memorize a shuffled pack of 52 playing cards is 33 seconds for someone. It ain't me, my people. I need more time than that. So anyway, these are some awesome superstars. So let's talk a little bit about how it connects to bio the brain, right? So we're going to do a little bit of top-down processing right now. So there is this term called long-term potentiation, and it's called LTP. And it refers to the synaptic enhancement after learning. So an increase of neurotransmitters are released or along with the receptors on the receiving neuron to indicate the strengthening of a synapse. And so let me tell you what that means in English. The more that you encode and the more neural pathways you make and keep on rehearsing, the stronger they get. The more likely, the quicker you're able to remember. Okay, so people who studied a lot for a test, they tend to finish the tests quicker because their neural pathways are super strengthened, which allows them to do things quicker, right? So again, kind of like learning to ride a bike, and the more and more things you master and encode and the more you learn, the quicker you're going to be able to do something, and the neural pathways are strengthened, right? So long-term, I always think of it as like long-term potential, because the more you encode and the more that you study it and the more that you effortlessly try to encode it, the more neural pathways build in your brain and the stronger they get. Like, how cool is that, right? So for example, Spanish for me. My Spanish was a lot better a year or two ago because I used to teach English language learners, not this year because I'm all psych, but I'm slowly losing the Spanish that I was learning because I'm no longer using it. So my synapses are getting weaker and weaker, right? So if you stop using a language, you're more likely to start having the information decay, right? So let's talk about stress, hormones, and memory because they all have something to do with it, right? Because remember, we automatically encode high emotional events, right? So, and this is where we have flashbulb memories, and we talked about this earlier on, but heightened emotions, usually 80% of it is stress related. Another 20% is usually happy, but it makes for stronger memories. So flashbulb memories are clear memories of emotionally significant events. So again, I think of 9/11 for me. I think of, I remember the days where, some of my family members have passed away, right? So these are strong emotional memories that automatically skip the working memory and sensory memory and go right to long-term, okay? Because our brain does it automatically because they know it's important, okay? So a little hierarchy, but we do need to go over the difference of, we have two types of memories, and they're stored in different places. Okay, so, and this is really important to know. So really, really take good notes and please copy down this hierarchy. Okay, explicit memories refer to facts and experiences that one consciously knows and declares. You consciously can remember when you were encoding it, and you remember it because you consciously did so. Implicit memory involves learning an action while the individual does not know it. So think about it this way. We have two types of long-term memories. We have explicit, which is consciously able to recall. We consciously encoded it. We were consciously there to remember to encode it. Implicit memory is without conscious recall. I did not choose to remember 9/11. It automatically happened. It was if you want to think of it as like a unconscious thing I stored, right? So I wasn't aware that I stored it. So we have explicit, which is with conscious recall, and then implicit memory is things that we never put an effort to remember. It just happened, okay? It was automatic. So when we go to explicit down here, explicit memories they go in the hippocampus. The hippo goes to campus to make memories. The hippo goes to a college campus to make memories. That is my mnemonic, right? Way to make meaning of the word, right? Now we're kind of already learning how our memory works. Explicit memories are processed in the hippocampus. Implicit memories are processed in the cerebellum. Processed in the cerebellum. Remember, the cerebellum is a part of our brainstem, right? And it controls our automatic processes, okay? So while explicit goes over facts and general knowledge, personal events, so your psychology class would fall under explicit, but implicit would fall under knowing your family's birthdays, knowing what to wear in winter, or so think of implicit as skills okay, so if you've ever been driving a car, and I highly recommend not doing this, but this happens to me all the time. It's like, have you heard of highway hypnotism, where I'm just driving and then, I'm kind of already there, but my brain automatically knows how to drive a car. I don't have to consciously think, okay, and this is the more experience you get at driving, the more implicit it gets. So that's why everyone says you become a better driver with experience, right? So these are the skills that you don't have to think about. So I could be, and this is bad of me, but I could be talking on the phone with my mom, driving and eating a hamburger all at the same time, and I can still drive without consciously really making decisions because my brain automatically knows what to do. Okay, so think of it as, and also implicit procedural memories fall under with classical and operant conditioning effects. So think of implicit as, if you start to salivate at the bell, that is a classical response, and that is procedural. So think of, again, implicit, think of it as all these, it's a procedure that you know to do well, right? So while explicit is conscious recall, implicit is without conscious recall. We didn't even know that we stored it, okay? And I really need you to know the difference of both, because hippocampus stores explicit and our cerebellum stores implicit. Okay, so we've really got to know the difference of the two, and I really highly recommend drawing this out, okay? All right, so a little bit of a reminder of where our hippocampus is, right? It's a part of our limbic system, which is our emotions, right? It's our emotional system where it processes explicit memories. Hippocampus is where explicit memories lie, okay? Our cerebellum and that's why it's also called little brain. I don't know if anyone caught on to that in our earlier chapter. It's the neural center in the hindbrain that processes implicit memories. And if you want to kind of think of it, our balance comes naturally to us. I don't have to consciously think, oh, I'm getting off balance, so I'm going to fall off my desk, right? We already feel it, so we automatically adjust. So think of cerebellum as automatic, okay? So that is where our implicit memories lie, our procedural memories, driving a car, I don't know, anything I'm trying to think of other things, and I'll come up with them during class, but just, again, thinking of procedural things that you don't have to have conscious recall for, okay? All right. And then, so just another little diagram to remind us of kind of parts of the brain that are involved with memory. We have our prefrontal cortex, right, which is in the top of our brain right here. So memory involving the sequence of events, but not events themselves. So again, this is where we start to put our memories. This is why REM sleep is so important, to store our memories and what we did during the day. Amygdala. Amy makes a comeback, my people. Amy's a part of fear, and she's also helps encode emotional aspects of memory. So again, that's where our flashbulb memories happen. The amygdala, right, has control of our emotions, and the amygdala helps out with making those emotional memories. The hippocampus is where we store our explicit memories, and the cerebellum, right, is where implicit memories lie, okay? So again, You know, you can almost think of implicit memories almost as like if you've done a sport your whole life. And so, for example, if you've been a gymnast, your procedural memory of how to like walk on a beam and do simple things that you may do without conscious recall, that's what implicit memory is. It's procedural. It's a procedure that you don't have to think about, but you do it. Okay. All right. So again, now let's talk a little bit about amnesia, right? So amnesia is the loss of memory, right? So after losing his hippocampus in surgery, patient Henry M. remembered everything before the operation, but cannot make new memories. So if anyone's ever seen 50 First Dates, that is your mnemonic for anterograde amnesia, right? So memories before the accident are intact. Surgery happened, no new memories. Okay, so anterograde amnesia is when we remember the past, but we can't make new memories. Okay, so 50 First Dates. If you guys haven't seen the movie, watch it. So now we're going to get a little bit into retrieval and getting information out, right? And so if you can't tell, this is Oprah Winfrey and that is Brad Pitt. So I was trying to like, how do we get retrieval out? I don't know how I encoded their faces. I did, but here they are, right? So retrieval refers to getting the information out of the memory storage, okay? So let's talk about retrieval. Retrieval refers to getting information out of our memory store. It is there, but how do we get it out and able to use it, right? So retrieval cues, that is essentially the big hook to how we remember how to retrieve information for our tests or whatever we're trying to accomplish, right? So it's when retrieval cues are stimuli that help people get information from long-term memory. Think of these cues as like search terms. Think of it as like a Google into your brain. One would use this internet search engine clues to help find your stored memories, okay? So we have a miniature Google machine in our brains, and we just have to know what words to attach it to so we can remember our information that we're trying to pull out, okay? So types of retrieval. And you might know some of this from the tests that your teachers give you, because tests are a test of your retrieval, of your encoding of your information. So if you've ever had a multiple choice test, aka my test, you use recognition. That is why I have us study buzzwords, because the buzzwords are your search engine in order for you to remember. So for example, when I say Pavlov, I hope you go right to classical conditioning, because I've said Pavlov, that's your cue to connect it to another web saying classical conditioning, right? So just imagine our brains have little Google search forms in it, and we have to find ways to be able to retrieve our information. So recognition, this is where, so in this multiple choice, you're able to recognize the correct answer. So recognition, right? Recognition. What's harder, so if you've ever had a teacher that did fill in the blank, they're really trying to test your recall, right? Because it's recall, you have to think of the word out of nowhere, right? So recognition is easier than recall. A lot of students would rather have multiple choice than short word answers, right? Because your answer is in the multiple choice, right? So hopefully you can recognize it, right? So in recall, the person must retrieve the information clearly from out of nowhere, right? So the FRQ, in a way, even though it's recognition when I give you the words, maybe there's a question that says, who was the person, make sure you add the person who created this. And you have to think, okay, you have nothing to go on. You're like, okay, what's that person's name? Again, recall is harder than recognition. Okay, so that's why I have you guys say, look for the buzzwords in the multiple choice, because it makes it so much easier, because the buzzwords are going to cue your brain to say, I know what this is, right? Right, my people. So retrieval cues, like this is an example of how our Google search engine works in our brain, right? So memories are held in storage by a web of associations, right? So kind of like I said, okay, Pavlov, and you could think classical conditioning, involuntary, dogs, bell, very similar to this. These associations are like anchors to your retrieval memory. It's like keys to kind of figuring out where we think, like how to get this information in your brain, right? So if you've ever been in a test, like staring off into space thinking, oh, what's that word? That's going to open up this word. That's going to allow me to answer this on my test, right? So we've all had this where it's like, we're like trying to Google search in our brain, and we have to come up with ways to create retrieval cues, right? So when I think of working memory, my retrieval cue is just minions. Like minions help me remember working memory, right? And those two are connected, right? So the more studying you do, the more retrieval cues you make from your basis of your information, right? And then we also have a way of priming. Okay, so to retrieve a specific memory from a web of associations, you must first activate one of the strands that leads to it, right? So in order to get to, Pavlov, you have to first know where we can find Pavlov. Okay, he's a behavioralist. I get to Pavlov, and then, I remember he's a part of classical conditioning. It's involuntary, right? But you have to first be primed, right? So as you read the multiple choice, you're getting primed to what you're supposed to be looking for in your knowledge, right? So if it says inoperant conditioning, you're like, okay, it's Pavlov, right? So there's my priming. There's the thing that's going to help me remember. And then it activates your concept web in your brain, and then it will help you remember the information attached to it. It's like a big web in our brain. Very similar to the web of like the death web, right? In our fear conditioning, very same concept, okay? So we also have this very interesting phenomena of context effects. Scuba divers recall more words underwater if they learn the list underwater, while they recall more words on land if they learn the list on land. So what it means is this: the context of what you study. So for example, if you study in one portion of your room at a desk, you are more likely to remember the information on your test if you sit in the same exact spot. So there's a reason that so if you've ever been into a class and like your seat's taken and it's test day, you're like, and like the whole room seems different. You're like, oh my gosh, this is a different place that I'm not used to. It will throw off your retrieval because you're not in the context that you learned it, right? And so it's so interesting. So for example, my brother, when for a way for him to study, he has ADHD, so his brain's everywhere at a time. He had to listen to blasting screamo music to study, and his teachers would allow him to listen to headphones of his music really loudly and for the test, and he did well because that's the environment that he studied it in. How crazy is that, right? There's also deja vu, right? So deja vu means you experienced this before. So cues from current situations may unconsciously trigger retrievals of other earlier experiences. So for example, I get deja vu a lot when I like enter a store or I go to like my friend's house and I'm looking through their kitchen. Something in my unconscious triggers a memory that makes it feel like I've done this before. And it's unconsciously done. And that's why you think of deja vu. You're like, whoa, I feel like I've done this before. And it's your brain telling you that unconsciously one of your little webs got triggered, and that's why you feel like you've done this before, because you have, and your brain is remembering it. Crazy, right? Okay. There's also mood congruent memory. So similar to context, this is where our tendency to recall experiences that are consistent with our current mood. So if you're happy or in a good mood, you're more likely to recall happy or positive events, while a bad mood will bring more sad and negative memories. So for example, when I'm in a sad mood, I automatically want to listen to sad music. Like it's just a thing. And I know that every time I'm sad, I got to put on Sam Smith, Adele, right? But and then all of a sudden you're listening to all the sad songs and all these other sad memories are coming out of your brain and you're like, oh my gosh, right? But it's because whenever you're in the mood of the memory that you're remembering, it helps trigger it, right? So likewise, if you come to our class angry every day, maybe your previous class is frustrating, then you recall on the test will be better if you frustrated then as well, if you take the test and you're frustrated still. So your mood is the same thing with your context around you. Moods can help induce memories, right? So if you've ever had a song that helped you, like a happy song that helps you remember of a happy time at a beach, same thing, my people, same thing. State-dependent memory. This one was hilarious for many reasons. So this is when memory retrieval is most efficient when an individual is in the same state of consciousness as they were when the memory was formed. So if you're really tired each day you come to your class, your recall will be better on the test if you are tired, because that is the state that you learned it in. They also did a study with a bunch of drunk people. And so they went to a college and they got a bunch of people, they allowed people to start drinking, and then they started to spout knowledge at them. People couldn't remember what they learned when they were sober, but when they got drunk again, they started to remember what they talked about when they were drunk. State-dependent memory. State-dependent memory. Anyway, okay. So this is our last slide for this video. Please, please, please take some time and draw this hierarchy out. It's a really great way to help us take a lot of information and help put it together in categories. So remember, we have memory processing for automatic and effortful. So when it comes to automatic, it is implicit memories. Automatic, without conscious recall. I always think of driving a car, because most of the time, I know how to, and I hate to say this, but I could be completely zoning out and I could still drive a car, right? And the longer you're driving, the more likely you're able to do this, because the more experienced you are. It's very automatic. I realize that I turn on my blinker without really consciously thinking of turning on my blinker. I, look to the left when I'm making a right turn without really even thinking about it, because it's all procedural. It's a procedure, right, that I've done millions of times. And it's processed in the cerebellum. How we process it is space, time, and frequency. Motor and cognitive skills, like riding a bike, along with classical conditioning, falls under this, because remember, it's involuntary, right? You're not consciously trying to recall it, right? And then we have effortful, which is explicit memories. This is with conscious recall. It's processed in the hippocampus. And we talked about semantic memory, which is facts and general knowledge, and episodic memory, which is personal experience, like events, family holidays. These are all things that we have to consciously try to remember and then recall, okay? So I'm gonna let you guys finish off this. Please draw this in your notes, and we will go on to our next video. You guys got this. It's a lot of note-taking today, my people, but you got this. All right, see you for the next video.